Yeah? Don't sound so sure. Hope you're all comfortable. Yeah. It's not just me, is it? It's a bit chilly this morning, isn't it? It is. Do we need to do some aerobics? No, don't be silly. Okay. I've been doing this series called Radicals, and we've looked at the life of Abraham, we've looked at the life of Moses, and this morning we're going to be looking at just an event, if you like, or an encounter that Peter had that I guess was kind of formative in his journey of discipleship and leadership. And so we're going to be in Matthew 14. If you want to find it now, that would be great. But I'm working on the assumption this morning that I'm not the only one that's ever failed at something. Can I just have a little nod so that I can make sure that assumption is not incorrect? So we all know what it's like to have failed at something. Isn't it the most horrible feeling? It is the most horrible feeling if you think there's no hope that comes out of that. But actually, I want to explore this morning that maybe failure could be a catalyst for future growth and future development. When I was, I think there's various areas that we can fail in, actually, whether it's personal or relational or spiritual or professional career, whatever it might be. There's lots of different departments that we can end up failing in. And in my, can I just share with one of my failures? No? Okay. That's fine, we'll move on. So when I was a pastor in the church in West Bromwich, when we moved to West Brom, we also took responsibility for a smaller church in Wednesbury that had been there for a long time. It had been a pioneer work. There was a small group of people, faithful people, that had sought to kind of keep the work going for a number of years. And so, as the wise thing to do, you don't make too many decisions in your first 6 months. You just kind of see the lay of the land, and you kind of, this is what I did anyway, whether it was the right thing or not, that's what I did. But 2 years in, it was clear that there was not really going to be much momentum gathered behind this church, and it were people, I think some people had sadly died, and then it reduced down even further. So we made a decision. It wasn't a decision to close it was a decision to try and rebirth it. I was kind of enthusiastic. I was obviously younger than I am now. I've aged a little. I've got a little bit of grey in my beard, which Rachel really wants me to get rid of. So that, if I come and I'm clean shaven, she's won. But the thing with this church was that we felt like it was right in the heart of a community. It had great opportunity if we could just put some resources and some people. And so we relocated from the church building into a community centre. We changed the service time from the morning to the afternoon so that we could maybe try and get some more people across from West Brom to help. It's so great in my mind. But I've got to say, it was a complete disaster. I felt like I'd failed. I've got to be honest, I felt like I'd failed the people, and I felt like I'd just failed in that first venture of church planting or repurposing, if you like, of a church. And while your failure might be a little bit different to mine, I can only speak of some of the recent failures in my life which are in the context of what I do. So there's a couple of things that out of that I believe that I can learn is that, one, there's ways to do it and not to do it, and I've made a note of those things for when we do it in the future. Did you catch that? Yeah. How exciting would that be? And so I've learned some things out of that, but I've also learned that actually failure doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to end you. It can be a springboard for the future. And so, do you know, the church, the group of people that were part of the church originally, some went to other churches and some came to the church in West Bromwich, and so they weren't lost, and we tried to do it well, but that particular project failed. And so, but you understand what that's like, don't you? You understand what it's like to fail something, the feelings that are associated with that, and sometimes it can take you a bit of time to get over, can't it? And I wonder, why is it, do you think, it can take us some time to get over it? Is it because maybe our identity was placed in the wrong thing? Do you think we put too much into that one thing? I don't know. I'm just throwing out some ideas. Why do you, in fact, you tell me, why do you think it is?
Because we find it hard to forgive ourselves.
Okay, so we find it hard to forgive. Yeah, okay, important. Anybody else got any other ideas? I think that's right, Mary. I think there's something tied up with that. We don't forgive ourselves for that. Any others? We dwell on it, yeah. Failure hurts. Yeah, it does. Why do you think it hurts? Pride. Isn't it? What's the thing that either stops us from doing something in the first place or from not doing it? It's either the fear of failure, which is actually about pride. How am I going to look? So if we want to play a safe life, we'll never do anything because we're conscious about preserving how we look. Is that true? So like the fear of stepping out into the unknown is like, well, what will happen if I really do take this step out? Then how am I going to look? How are my bosses going to view me? And you work in a different environment to I, but for me, it's a lot of pressure. Can I just say something? Right, this is being recorded, and that's okay. All right. But within the church world, right, you might not experience this, but I certainly experience it. There's a lot of pressure to make things grow. All right, so if 1 week, there's only 30 of us, I can sometimes feel like a real depression. Because I know that the following Monday, Margaret's... there hasn't been just 30 of us in my time here, all right. But if I know that Margaret's going to write in the book 30 people, and then at the end of that month, that book is going to go off to headquarters, and thankfully they don't look at it too hard, but they would see, what happened there? And I can kind of take on this responsibility. Well, I've got to make this thing grow. Right, and actually, can I also let you into another little secret? I've given up on that. I have. Because, at the end of the day, we as a church, we can only do what we can do, can't we? Right? We can only love one another, love Jesus, and then entrust the rest to him. Right? So some of you have come because people have invited you, because they said, actually, maybe there's something good going on. And so you've come and you've stayed, and which is great. But we all know what it's like to feel that kind of pressure and expectation that if we do something, then it might risk my reputation and then what people are going to think. I don't know whether you saw just this week the guy from Barings Bank who brought down Barings Bank, and he said that it started out right. His catastrophic failure, it brought down Barings Bank. £800+ million, just shortfall that just made the whole entire bank collapse. But it started with £10,000. If he had gone to his boss and said, you know what, I've made a bit of an error, we're down 10,000. Now, I don't know, some of you will have a great understanding of how the financial industry works. I haven't got a clue, but I understand that if he'd have gone and said, you know what, I've made an error here, we're short £10,000, they would have said, don't worry, let's rectify it, I'm sure. He might have had egg on his face for a little while because there was lots of pressure on him. He was a high flyer. But instead he sought to try and cover it up and then ended up that his failure was even worse than if he'd just said, I've made a bit of a boo-boo. Can we try and sort this out? Because it's pride, isn't it, that stops us wanting to either ask for help in the point where we think like we're going to fail or from stepping out in the first place. It's pride. So let's turn to Matthew 14. And I'd encourage you, when you get home, to read the other accounts in Mark and in John about this passage and just see some of the variations and the differences. It might just help shed some further light. So we're going to read through it. I'm going to throw out some thoughts, and then we're going to land, and then we're going to go home and get warm. Okay. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Interestingly, immediately Jesus made the disciples. Now, the passage before had talked to, Matthew had revealed this miraculous provision of the 5,000, right? It's 5,000 men, so there were women and children included in that. And so there's a massive amount of people that have been fed off 5 loaves and 2 fish. Okay, that's like, ooh, that's a woo moment, all right? If you were there, that would be like, wow. Because here's Jesus, who's taken this bread and this fish, and he's fed over 5,000 people with just that measly portion. Like he's demonstrating and showing something to the people that he's not just a prophet. He's not just going to be a political king, but he has the ability to provide for their very need, the most basic of need. He's beginning to just reveal to his disciples, even in greater measure, just who he is. I don't know about you, but if I was one of the disciples at that point, I really would be amazed. I would be like astounded. And they collect up 12 basketfuls of leftovers. And they're thinking, this is food for the next day. Well, this is supper for when we go on. And so at this point, there's a big crowd, and there's a beginning of a swell where the people are trying to get Jesus to think about it, or trying to drive an agenda where Jesus becomes political king. And so one commentator says that Jesus sends his disciples off immediately at this point when there's starting to be this groundswell. It's evening already. And he sends them off into the boat to get them away from the crowd so that they don't get influenced by their thought, and that he can dismiss them. But he can also take a little bit of a breather and goes and retreats on the mountain, just in some quiet and some solitude, because he needs to do some business with the Father. You know, he'd previously had information that John the Baptist had been beheaded. And after he'd received that news, he'd wanted to go and spend some time alone. But the crowd found out where he were. And then he did all this miraculous stuff. And so he retreats and withdraws. And he sends off the disciples immediately. Now, bear in mind, this was a long day already. Right? They'd not slept. They'd been giving out bread and fish. They'd been making sure that everybody had been fed. And they come back, and immediately Jesus sends them off into the boat. Now, you've got to understand something about boats. It didn't have a 500cc Kawasaki engine in the back. It wasn't like they could just pull the cord, let's sit back and chill out, lads, until we get to the other side. It had a sail and it had oars. Who was going to do it? The disciples. So they get into the boat. And I just imagine what they're thinking, oh, Jesus, really? Seriously? I'm going to be really tired. But they do it. They get into the boat. After he had dismissed them, he went up onto the mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Okay. Now, some of you just love people, don't you? You love being around people. You love that kind of hustle and bustle of life. I think Jesus loved people, but he also understood the need to be alone. And there was times where he had to withdraw. Maybe in order for us to understand the working and the process of the discipleship issue aspect of our faith and our life and what God wants to do in us, we need to take some time alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So not only had they had a long day, the wind was against them. Now, some commentators try to suggest that the boat wasn't actually that far out to sea, and that Jesus was on the edge and he could see the boat. But the writer makes it clear that the boat was already some way out. Like they would say 3 miles out to sea. They were in the middle of the sea, being buffeted and bashed by the wind. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be pretty tired at this point. After a long day, with not much sleep, and having to row into the wind. During the 4th watch of the night, which is around 3 a.m., between 3 and 6 a.m., Jesus went out to them walking on the lake, as you do. Amazing, isn't it? Like, here's Jesus. He's had some time with the Father, and you can assume something. He knows he's sent them out. And I think it's John who makes mention that it's either John or Mark makes mention that he'd intended to pass on Like, Jesus, why would you do that? Why would you walk past them? But he doesn't walk past them, as Matthew records. He sees them and he's walking. But the disciples see this. Let's read on. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Wouldn't you? Let's be honest. Right, I don't think they would have seen this before. So, late at night or early morning, as it is, dark, misty, and they see this figure on the ocean, on the sea. And they cry out, it's a ghost! Like, I'd be petrified too. I'd be putting down the oars, I'd be screaming, I'd be shouting, I'd be like, I want my mum! Or I want my brother, he's bigger than me. And so you would be afraid, you would be scared. You'd be thinking, what is that? And it's almost like in those moments of life when it's misty and it's dark and it's dismal and it's miserable, you often ask the question, what is that? Not another thing. But maybe that other thing is the very presence of Jesus. You've just not seen him clearly yet. Maybe it's Jesus who, while you're in the storm and in the boat and you're battered against the waves, he's right there. He's got his eye on you. But you know what? He's doing something in you that couldn't happen if you weren't in the boat, in the storm, on the lake. But it's wonderful, isn't it? Because as we read on, we see this just encounter unfold. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. But Jesus immediately said to them, it wasn't like he left them hanging for a little bit. It's like, I'm just going to play with the minds. I'm going to play with the hearts and just see what happens here. Immediately when he saw the response of the disciples, that they were terrified, that they were afraid, he spoke, take courage, it is I. And one commentator would suggest that it is I. It's like he's trying to convey to them, it is I am. Don't worry, it is me, the great I am. Take some courage. So in the midst of the waves on the sea, where it's being buffeted and billowed and all kinds of fear that's going on because of the natural circumstances, Jesus says to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. You see, in the middle of life and all its storms and all its trial and all its worry, sometimes we just need to hear those words, don't we? Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. You see, because until just a little bit later, there's still the waves that were going on, still the waves crashing over the boat. But hear Jesus' words, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And then Peter, I wonder what was going on in Peter's mind at this point. You see, if you've been reading through Matthew, you'll see that Matthew's painting this picture of Peter's progression as a disciple, but also as a leader. And whenever there's reference to Peter, he's always positioned as the first in the list, isn't he? So giving him the first amongst equals, if you like, the place of leadership. And so Jesus, I believe that Jesus is in all of this, is not only developing Peter as a disciple, he's developing him as a leader. But Peter was the first one to say, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Wow. The other disciples didn't say it, did they? You see, the thing is about leadership is that you have to be prepared to go where nobody else has gone. And you have to be prepared to take a step and take a risk, even though it might mean that you have egg on your face. See, Peter was being trained by Jesus because he was going to play a pivotal role in the development of the church. And without some of these life experiences, then Peter wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility later on. And the reality is that for some of you, the failures and the things that you've experienced in life, it's been preparation, it's been foundational for what you've gone on to experience and achieve and been able to cope with. I'm amazed by the ability for us to be able to cope with stuff. I look out just now and I know some of your stories and some of your experiences and some of the things that you've gone on. And in the point of the storm, you wondered whether you'd ever get through. Didn't you? You wondered, am I ever going to get out of this? Is this storm ever going to stop? But look at you now. Look at you now. Doesn't change the experience. The experience is the same. You can remember it. No doubt when maybe even if you think about it, you can still experience the feelings that you were there. But look at you now. Jesus is maybe just preparing you for life, but also importantly revealing who he is. Because let's not forget, the point of the story is not Peter, it's Jesus. But Jesus says to him, come. I wonder if Peter went, bit cold, lads. It's not very firm, lads. He, at the beckoning of Jesus, he steps out of the boat. Like logically, rationally, you think, that is stupid. Peter, have you lost your mind? But you notice, he didn't presume on Jesus. When he heard the word come, he knew it was Jesus. And therefore, when Jesus beckoned him, he took the step. Now, if he'd have just jumped out of the boat, wonder what would have happened? Maybe he would have sank. I don't know. Maybe he would have, I just don't know. We're guessing. But when Jesus beckoned him, he took a step out of the boat while everybody else stayed behind. And he begins to walk. We don't know the distance. We don't know how far Peter went before it all started to go a little bit wrong for him. But I want you to just, at this moment in time, just savor the fact that this was a victorious moment. This was a victorious faith moment. Like, he can often get battered for the failure in this. But it was a faith moment. It's a victorious faith moment. Because Peter, for a time, was walking on water. Like looking at Jesus. However far away Jesus was, he had his eyes fixed on him. He wasn't noticing the wind and the waves at this point. He wasn't noticing the fact that this was dangerous. He had his eyes fixed on Jesus. And he's walking on the water. Have you ever been in the swimming baths and tried it? I haven't done lately. I used to, as a kid, think, I wonder how far I can get. Now, Peter was walking on the water, Jesus. But then something happens, and I think it's something that happens with us when we begin to take steps of faith. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." It's like when we take our eyes off Jesus and the fact that he's beckoned us to come or beckoned us to go and challenged us to go and commissioned us to go, we can sometimes take our eyes off him and begin to look around and think this is not logical. This just doesn't make sense. This is a dangerous position. This is just dangerous. What am I doing? What will people think of me? I wonder what would happen if the apostles thought, well, what will people think of us? Would we have the kind of birth of the church that we had? I don't think so. What would happen if people like Shane Claiborne, if you've ever heard of him, just a radical in the United States, didn't say, do you know what, maybe we could be something different, could be about the church community and bringing something of the prophetic into the everyday. I wonder what it would be like if Billy Graham, when he first felt called to ministry, thought, you know what, Mel, we'll give it a go. And I'm going to step out But imagine if Billy Graham had seen what was around him, all the voices that were saying, well, maybe Billy, it's just a pipe dream. Imagine if he'd listened to those fears and those anxieties, those worries. How are we going to fundraise this? How are we going to sustain this? Imagine if he'd listened to those voices. And maybe one or two of you might just have been saved at a Billy Graham concert or meeting, or you might know somebody who was. Imagine the numbers of people who wouldn't have met Jesus as a result if he'd listened to the fears and the rational voices. See, Peter's problem, Peter's failure of faith, wasn't necessarily that he had, Jesus says he had little faith. It wasn't that he had no faith, it's just that he had misplaced faith. He began to look at the circumstances around him and took his eyes off Jesus. And the faith failures that we have, could it be because we've taken our eyes off Jesus? Could it be? There might be some other circumstances for sure. But talking about our faith and our life, is it maybe some of the failures? You know that when I preach, I often do the work of trying to reflect on my own life. So I'm not just preaching it and not living it. And I reflect upon my own life. I look back at some of my failures in life and ministry, and I just think, do you know what, Ian? At that point, you just took your eyes off Jesus. You began to look around what was around you, some of the dangerous aspects of a life of faith. And so Jesus says to him immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? I love that. I love that even just in that moment, Jesus is concerned for Peter. He didn't leave him, well, Peter, I just want to leave you there a little bit longer just to see how you do. Immediately he reached out his hand, lifted him up. And then you can imagine, can't you, just them walk. I don't know how far they've got, but imagine them walking back to the boat together. Like Peter clinging on to Jesus. I wonder how Peter felt in that moment. Do you think maybe he felt a little bit disappointed? Do you think he felt rebuked by Jesus? You have little faith. Like, you started out so well, Peter. What went wrong? Maybe some of you started out so well. Maybe you started out by jumping out of the boat and all passionate, gung-ho, like life for Jesus. And maybe some of you feel like you're sinking. And maybe this morning Jesus is just saying, come on, you little faith. It's not that you've got no faith. It's just maybe it's misplaced faith. And he's calling you back to refocus your attention upon him, who is the author and authority over all things. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. You see, I sometimes wonder whether our failures are in fact the foundation points for our future growth, in which it's not simply about our character and our development, but it's about our understanding of who God is. Who this Jesus is in whom we serve, because I know that some of the messes that I've got myself into, Jesus has been ever so gracious in pulling me out. See, actually, this event and the failure of Peter, I think, stirred something in them that wasn't then just about the awe that they felt, but they worshipped him. Even in this, I wonder whether Peter was a leader, having experienced something of the rescue of Jesus, being brought back into the boat. Truly, you are the Son of God. Michael Wilkins suggests this. You see, you could say, well, surely Peter just needed some more faith. Surely he just needed to have a boost of faith. You know, maybe you've heard people say, well, you just need some more faith. Have you ever had that said to you? Like maybe you're believing for something, or you're just anticipating something, and you just think, mate, well, you just need more faith. Anybody ever had that said to them? No? Oh. Yeah? A few nods. But maybe it's not the fact that you need more faith. Maybe it's that you need to refocus your faith. Maybe it's that you need to look to Jesus. Faith is not like, this is what Wilkins suggests, faith is not like a commodity of which Peter needs more. Rather, faith is consistent trust in Jesus to accomplish what Peter is called to do. Rather, faith is the consistent trust in Jesus. That, I don't know about you, but when I read that sentence, I just thought, the pressure's off a little bit. Like, it's not about how much faith or how little faith, because remember what Jesus said about the faith of mustard seed? It's the object of our faith. And so if our faith is in the wrong object, then we're going to have some faith failures. Would that be true? But if our faith is in the correct object, consistent trust in Jesus, then it doesn't mean to say that we're never going to face challenges in life. It doesn't even mean to say that we may not even take but it's this consistent drawing back to faith in Jesus, who is above all and in all. Because you know when Jesus got into the boat and the disciples still had to row to the other side, the wind and the waves calmed down. It was his authority over the storm, over the wind and the waves, that caused them to worship the one who is God over all. Okay, so I think there are three things that we learn, and I'm going to draw to a close in a moment. But first of all, I want to say, read this from John Ortberg, and this is quoted by Wilkins in his commentary. And before we get too harsh on ourselves or harsh on Peter, let's read these words from John Ortberg. Only Peter knew that when he sank, Jesus would be there, and he was wholly adequate to save. The other disciples could not know because they never got out the boat. This is the fundamental truth. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. If you want to experience the power of God in your life, you've got to take a step of faith. It involves risky obedience. So if we want to experience some of those things, we want to experience walking on the water, faith steps, then we've got to take some. Now, I'm not naive enough to think or to suggest that every faith step that we take will always be successful. Because sometimes we get it wrong, don't we? Sometimes actually we think God's asking us to do something and we take a step out of faith and it just kind of goes flat on its face. But you know, we're only ever going to find that out if we get out of the boat. And so maybe this year, something that God is stirring us is that actually maybe we've just been a bit too comfortable in the boat and we're expecting somebody else to take it. Maybe we should be the first to take the step of faith out of the boat and do what God's calling us to do. Because who knows what will happen as we consistently trust Jesus. So, what do you do when your faith is waning, when you feel like you're Peter and you feel like you're sinking? What do you do? Well, this is what I think Peter did, and this is what I think will help us as we look to navigate a life of faith. When your faith is waning and you have doubts, look to Jesus and get back in the boat for a while. Not just on your own, but you need others. And Jesus got back into the boat with the disciples. I wonder what kind of conversation they had in the boat. Do you? I don't know, do you ever read these narratives and think, I wonder what happened there? Because surely they didn't just crack on rowing the boat and get to the other side and that was it, we'll never speak of it again. But they're in the boat. I wonder if Jesus took the opportunity to begin to talk to them about what it looked like to be a follower of his and a disciple of him, and have faith and trust in him to keep going. But you know, when you take a step of faith and it doesn't quite go right, you sometimes just need to get back in the boat. And the trouble is that when we feel like we've failed, when we feel like we might have egg on our face, all we want to do is sink. Isn't it? Like, when you fail something, you think, all I want to do is the ground to swallow me up. That's not what Peter did. Peter knew it was only Jesus who could rescue him, only Jesus who could save him, only Jesus in whom he could have security. And so he looked to Jesus first and foremost. Some of you have got to look to Jesus first and foremost. You can't just look at your friends. And they might think, oh, yeah, that's a bit harsh. But Jesus is the one who saves. Jesus is the one who heals. Jesus is the one who redeems. Jesus is the one who transforms. Jesus is the one who sets you free from your failures. Jesus is the one who brings growth in you by the power of his Spirit. Jesus is the one who does it. And so first and foremost, we look to Jesus. And then we get back in the boat with other people. The thing is, when we fail or we mess up and we do stuff that we just think, oh, how are people going to respond? We feel like running. You've got to get back in the boat. Because you've got to get back in the boat in order to be just heal. Bit of space. But you don't stay in the boat. Because what happened? They got to the other side. And what happened at the other side? They got out the boat and they carried on doing ministry and mission. Peter's faith might have been wounded for a little while. His life might have just been a little bit wounded and shaped by the experience, but he got out the boat on the other side. He didn't say to Jesus, Jesus, I'm not getting out of this boat again. Because I know what happened last time. And I know we're on dry ground now, but I'm not getting out of the boat. He got out of the boat. And if you begin to track it, you see that he not long after this, made just an incredible declaration about who Jesus is. And then he goes and messes it up again. And then he does something else, doesn't he? He does another step of faith, and he goes and messes it up again. But all the time we're seeing that he is growing. He's growing in his discipleship, and he's growing in his leadership. And more importantly, he's growing in the understanding of who Jesus is. And so take our faith adventures and our failures as points in which our journey is developed and growth is brought about. But you can't stay on your own. You need other people with you. Secondly, there'll always be another chance to step out in faith. Some of you think, well, that was it. I'll not try it again. It's like sometimes in our relationships, something goes wrong and we kind of make, I'll never do that again. And what we do is we make this kind of promise, a covenant with ourselves that will not happen. We harden our hearts to ever loving again. Maybe the same is with regards to faith. We take a step of faith and it doesn't work out. We say, well, I'll never do that again. And we end up playing it safe and we harden our hearts to the adventure that maybe Jesus is calling us to. Because you think, oh, maybe there'll just be no other chance. But there's always another chance. The question is, are you willing to take it? Is this making some sense this morning? And thirdly, faith failures a great opportunity for growth. Wilkins writes this: the difference between growth and failure rests on whether Peter continues to be receptive to God's revelation and will. When he remains open to the things of God, he grows both in his personal discipleship and in his leadership responsibility. When he does not remain receptive to the things of God, he fails in both. These stories function as warnings for disciples and leaders within the church throughout the ages. Like Peter, the difference is the kind of faith we display in Jesus. See, I said this before, it's not faith in faith, it's faith in Jesus. It's our faith in Jesus. And what is that kind of faith? What kind of faith is it that we are displaying? I believe that Peter was challenged to have this single-minded focus and trust in Jesus, not to doubt, not to have fear, not to worry, but to focus wholeheartedly on Jesus. And we know that Peter fails at that, doesn't he? He fails at that. He fails spectacularly at that. That should give you and I some encouragement, by the way. Because not only is Jesus challenging Peter, who was going to be a great leader within the church and the one in which would spearhead a lot of things. Not only did he mess up, and he was restored and used by God, your failure is not fatal. Our failure is not fatal. But I believe is the springboard for future success. Because how are we ever going to learn if we don't give stuff a go and reflect and learn if we don't ever fail at some stuff? Some of us are so scared of failure that we've led a safe life. Now, I don't even know what it might look like for you to live a faith adventure. But all I want us to say, all I want to encourage us to do is, Jesus, what is it you're calling me to do? What is it you're calling us to do? It requires us to step out of the boat. And maybe, unlike Peter, not sink, but keep walking to accomplish and achieve what God has called you to do. Because ultimately, where God calls, he provides and he equips and he strengthens. And so faith failures should lead us to refocus on Jesus. And I believe that Peter demonstrates that with Jesus, failure is never the end of our opportunities to take steps of faith. Failure is indeed the foundation for your future growth. Let's pray. True to my word, I want to give people an opportunity this morning to respond to Jesus. And we're going to pray in a moment, so if you could just keep your eyes closed. We talked about Jesus a lot this morning and make no apology for that. Maybe you're not a follower of Jesus this morning. Maybe you've never professed to follow Jesus. But maybe you're here because a friend or somebody's invited you and you're exploring what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. Maybe you identify with Peter's failure and you think, do you know what, there's stuff in my life that I just failed at and I have no hope for the future that this actually has some purpose or meaning. One of the beautiful things about Jesus is that he redeems our failures. The good news is that our failure isn't fatal and it certainly isn't final. But he redeems us, he saves us, and all it takes is for us, like Peter, to cry out, Lord, save me. Because Peter recognized that in that moment he couldn't save himself, he was sinking. And all it takes for you this morning to begin this journey of exploring who Jesus is, to say, Jesus, I can't save myself. I realize that my focus has been on other things.